Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis, to the Praise of Fly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Telegram, Locals, and Facebook, all of which are in the description box. You can support me not only on Locals, but also on Buy Me a Coffee. And again, if you support me on Locals, you can interact with the channel more directly, make recommendations for future content, and other such things. Also, I'll read the super chats at the end first, and any other chats as time allows and as they're relevant to the discussion. So let's get into it. Why the right loses? Well, first of all, let's see who's in the chat. Voltra, hello. Minoan, hello. Big Brain Content, hello. Cyber Ninja Zero, hello. Zero World, hello. Nice. We got 12 in the live chat. Hopefully we can get that up to 44. That was last Monday's. So that'll be really fun. All right. So why the right loses. I'm going to start off with a quote from Robert Louis Dabney on conservatism. It's an excellent quote. It may well be inferred against the present movement for women's rights will certainly prevail from the history of its only opponent, Northern conservatism. This is a party which never conserves anything. Its history has been that it demurs to each aggression of the Progressive Party and aims to save its credit by a respectable amount of growling, but always acquiesces at last in the innovation. What was the resisted novelty of yesterday is today one of the acceptable principles of conservatism. It is now conservative only in affecting to resist the next innovation, which will tomorrow be forced upon its timidity and will be succeeded by some third revolution to be denounced, then adopted in its turn. American conservatism is merely the shadow that follows radicalism as it moves towards perdition. It remains behind it, but never retards it, and always advances nearer its leader. Its impotency is not hard to explain. It is worthless because it is the conservatism of expediency only and not of sturdy principle, and intends to risk nothing serious for the sake of the truth and has no idea of being guilty of the folly of martyrdom. It always, when about to enter a protest, very blandly informs the wild beast whose path it essays to stop that its bark is worse than its bite, and that it only means to save its manners by enacting its decent role of resistance. The only practical purpose which it now serves in American politics is to give enough exercise to radicalism to keep it in wind and to prevent it from becoming pursy and lazy, from having nothing to whip. No doubt after a few years, when women's suffrage shall have become an accomplished fact, conservatism will tacitly admit it into its creed and thenceforward plume itself upon its wise firmness in opposing with similar weapons the extreme of baby suffrage. And when that too shall have been won, it will be heard declaring that the integrity of the American Constitution requires at last the refusal of suffrage to asses. In this case, he means the animal, not as an insult to a human. There it will assume with great dignity its final position. Now, this was written in 1897. In light of where the modern conservative movement in the United States is today, there are many things from which Robert Louis Dabney could not have foreseen, and arguably it's worse than even he predicted. But I think what's important is the perspicacity of his vision and seeing what was coming. Now he doesn't really go into this particular angle. This is one that I'll go into tonight, but he makes an important point. He says it is worthless because it is the conservatism of expediency only and not of sturdy principle. So that just begs the question, in what way is it expedient? What is it the conservatism of expedience? Well, to put it another way, winning is not profitable. The conservatives never let victory get in the way of profitability. The TLDR is conservatives only care about money. And I could just say that's the end of the show and we're done. But of course, there's more to it than that. But given that many American conservatives claim to be Christians, let's read from 1 Timothy 6:10 from the King James. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Well, this is going to be the sort of refrain throughout today's episode. The love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. So we say that what it does is that money warps morals and values. So, for example, bean counting, this sort of like pettifogging and meaningless task maxing, is a bad use of your time, is an opportunity cost. So if you are calculating money and calculating profitability, and meanwhile the barbarians are howling at the gates, threatening to throw down your walls, that's not going to help you win. It's literally a meaningless task that doesn't have any real value where the fight is. a good example of what happens when bean counter max is Carthage. Rome versus Carthage, who won? Rome. Well, in part because Rome had goals higher than mere financial gain. And of course, when the barbarians overthrew Rome, they had evolved into a decadent stage of pleasure seeking and finance seeking that Carthage had devolved into. And so basically what you then see is that in this kind of struggle, because remember, the context for this is the culture war, which admittedly is not a full war, but if we look at, say, the lead up to the American Civil War, when there was the cultural disputes in the preceding 3 decades, it eventually blew up into open war because no resolution could be achieved. And that's the closest analogy we have in U.S. history to what I think is coming now. That doesn't work because you'll lose. And we see this throughout history again and again and again. The quote, merchants, Tyre lost to the Assyrians and Alexander the Great. Carthage lost to Rome. The decadent Western Roman Empire lost to the barbarians. So on and so on and so on. It's just not a winning strategy in the long run. And if we look at like domestic turmoil, well, the Bolsheviks won in Russia. The Jacobins won in France. The revolutionaries won in Latin America. It's basically just a waste of time. It doesn't actually help the struggle because you're spending time bean counting and pettifogging rather than winning some sort of battle of ideas or some sort of martial struggle. But since we're dealing with the culture war, it's the battle of ideas. And this just shows you the peak idiocy of American conservatism. I was watching a few weeks ago, this BoomerCon, or maybe more like an even Gen X, but he was basically had a BoomerCon mentality. And he was saying that the trades don't have enough people in them. So of all the harebrained ideas, his idea was that, well, we need to have a marketing plan for children's books to get young people into the trades. I mean, this is insane, right? I mean, okay, 6 years old, you said take you like 12 years, you're 18. We don't have 12 years. And like, why would children's books help us get us to the point where there's more tradesmen? It's just, he can only think in terms of making money, right? He's going to write the books. They're going to get published. He'll get royalties on the books. And that's motivating people to go into the trades. That's insane. That's just insane. That's not going to work. In fact, that's been the whole conservative movement since, its revival in the 80s. Just write books, complain about what's going on, and then lose gracefully. Because people will buy your books and you'll make money, but then you won't win. All right. And of course, the real issue in the trades is demographics. People just didn't have kids after the 70s. And also, if they say in the Soviet Union, they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work, better start upping those wages. The other thing is through the process of commodification, as Marx pointed out, family and religious life are eroded because everything has a price, right? And in any sort of traditional religious society, there were certain things that you just couldn't sell. That was, for example, in the Middle Ages, buying and selling of church offices was called simony, and you weren't supposed to do that. And other things weren't supposed to be sold. But, these are just untapped commodity markets that have to be beaten down and eventually are. Okay, so that's one. Then two, the right caves on the social issues. Now, why does that happen? Whatever social issue it is, whether it's divorce, homosexuality, transgenderism, on sexual matters, whether it's ideological things like atheism, deism, non-Christian beliefs, why do they always cave? Well, basically, if you're in business, and most people who are on the conservative right in America are what we would call the petite bourgeoisie, the craftsmen and middle managers, middle producers that are between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. They have to sell goods and services. So given that they've already lost the culture war, right? I mean, conservatives were supposed to conserve traditional values, maybe Christian values, maybe American values, and it's completely been eviscerated since the 90s. There's literally nothing left. It's a complete total rout. And we'll get to that too, but they've in part ceded political and cultural institutions to the left. And so once the laws change, and then the left is able to normalize behavior that otherwise was prohibited, and they become a sufficient number of the population, Are you going to say to them, well, no, we're not going to serve you any goods and services because we disapprove of the way you live? Well, no, you'll go out of business. And, if you don't hire somebody based on that principle, you'll get sued by any number of, activist groups. And even without the fear of lawsuits, if enough people embrace lifestyles that you disapprove of and you don't hire them, you just won't be able to hire anybody. And so there's a built-in market incentive to give in, to kowtow once the meta changes. So once these lifestyles that you object to are normalized, you're going to have to water things down because otherwise you'll go out of business. And this is something that was pointed out by many libertarians in the 80s, right? So at this point, apartheid South Africa still existed. And they also would point to the then recent victories of the civil rights movement, saying that corporations were behind a lot of the resistance to these movements, these traditional views on ethnic groups, precisely because of the limitations and constraints that it put on economic growth. You couldn't hire certain people, and the same would go for beliefs about religion or not religion, different sexual practices as well. And so there's this sort of built-in pull that as long as the consumer base, right, the customer's always right. So as long as the consumer base, and less importantly, but still important, the base of people you recruit from, embrace these alternative ways of doing things, and you're going to have to go along because they're your market. Like if they go, you go with them. So that's part of the thing, that you're dependent upon them, which is a joke. That's why, let me put it this way, that in North Vietnam, the NVA, and in Afghanistan, the Taliban, were not dependent upon what the Americans thought about anything. They could resist 100% because they had a totally different set of incentives. So then the third thing is, they're not going to pay people to win the culture war. Okay, well, this is a culture war. So you got to deal with, right now, the modern age, say cinema and TV shows. But of course, you still have books, you still have poetry, you still have broader cultural artifacts. And for years now, culture has just been completely abandoned by the right. They've just completely given up on it. So we could imagine, back in the day, Rudyard Kipling, a classic example of a man of the right, defender of the British Empire. He writes poetry. He writes some of our most well-loved children's stories, the Jungle Book, Kodak the White Seal, and Rikki Tikki Tavi. He, was a commented on current events. He was a historian. He was a man, a well-rounded man who had understood the elements of the Western civilization. Well, who do we have like that today on the right? Maybe the last person we had, sort of, was William F. Buckley Jr., maybe. And now we have these complete, Philistine troglodytes that don't understand Shakespeare, that don't understand Homer, that don't understand any of the sort of cultural artifacts that point to what the West has always represented and what the West was and could be again if we were inspired by these sources, right? Instead of Kipling, we have Philistines. We have the boss who owns, his own business. Okay, it's not national, it's not global. He's petite bourgeoisie. He's maybe one or two businesses. He loves football, beer, tailgate parties, and loose women. Compare that to, again, a Kipling and what his tastes were and what Kipling was able to still, even now, people who aren't even right-wing read Kipling because of his literary talent and skill. But by the same token, by having ceded that ground to the left has a complete national cultural hegemony in film, in TV shows, in comic books, in video games, in books, to those that still read them. And so it's their ideas that populate this sort of meta level. And given that this is a, quote, culture war, it's the culture, right? They are the ones that have cultural hegemony. Once upon a time, Christianity had cultural hegemony. And then you have to ask ourselves, well, how did that happen? Some of my previous videos on the casual stream have talked about this in some broad sense. But suffice it to say, for this particular case, the right was not willing to pay for people to become academics, to become poets, to become philosophers, to become men of letters. Rather, they just wanted more bean counters. They just wanted more bean counters to eke out a little bit of a profit margin here. Meanwhile, there's a complete total rout on the side of the left, at the hands of the left. The other thing is, but it's worse than that, right? That's just mere neglect and negligence. They're not even fighting a culture war, right? They're doing the exact opposite. You might say, well, Mr. Conservative is going to say, well, why are there so many leftists and communists and blah, blah, blah? Well, it's because you're paying for it, right? So we got Anthony Sutton and his trilogy on the Soviet technical transfers. American corporations were funding the Soviet Union all the way, till the end of the Soviet era. Now, his trilogy caps off, I think, in 67. So he goes from 1917 to 67, 50 years. And for the first, 1917 to 1933, that years, it was illegal to trade with the Soviet Union because the United States does not officially recognize the Soviet Union. And it didn't stop them. They kept trading. And almost, all the, quote, miracles of socialism with Stalin's 5-year plans, 1928 to 1933, primarily, they were all from Western concessions, the vast majority which were from the United States, with also Britain and France and Italy and Japan and Germany being a part of it as well. And then China, of course, after 1978 with Deng Xiaoping, even more colossally stupid. America shipped all its factories over to China because of the race to the bottom, cheaper cost for labor. And now China has us over a barrel, as we saw beginning with COVID 3 years ago. And so now they're literally paying for it. Now, that's on a grand national scale, but what about domestically? Well, how many boomer conservatives, extra conservatives, even millennial conservatives have their, go to Hollywood blockbusters, pay Hollywood, buy their ticket to watch the latest cape crap. They have Netflix subscription. They have all of these entertainment subscriptions paying them. Whereas, say, someone like myself doesn't get anywhere near the money that these people give Netflix. And they wonder why we're losing. Well, because you're literally financing the enemy. You're literally financing the other side. It's worse than negligence. It's complete, at best, it's complete incompetence. At worst, it's treasonous. Because you're literally bankrolling the enemy. And anybody on your side who could fight the enemy at that level just gets completely sidelined and ignored. So, for example, just a little brief page out of my own life. When I wanted to get into history, I came out of the homeschooling movement. The whole point was, well, we're going to educate all these people at home so they don't get corrupted by the world, and then we'll send them out to the world to make a difference. Well, psych. It's Lucy with the football and Charlie Brown. There's no support. There was just no support for me to get there from the community that I came from. And of course, the homeschooling community has sort of disintegrated from my generation. There seems to be attempts to rebuild it, especially in light of the lockdowns and the difficulty with education. But again, don't hold your breath. It fell apart last time. Even if they do rebuild it, the people around today haven't learned their lesson. But the people that weren't supporting me to get a history degree, ideally, I wanted to get a PhD to teach history. They were giving money to Hollywood. They were giving money to Netflix. They were giving money to, the trendy clothing stores. All of these progressive institutions, they were paying for. Whereas, the left, they'll pay for, some, hobo bohemian artist writing some avant-garde trash. But because it serves the cause of the revolution or whatever social issue they're concerned about, he'll get support. He'll get what he needs to, change people's perspective. And so, I mean, that's completely farcical. These people are just not serious at all. And so, well, okay, that's actually points 3 and 4. Points 3 was the treason, and point 4 was the cultural hegemony. And then there's also individualism. Oh, it's like, oh well, we're individuals. We're gonna do this. Okay, well, and that's in part why I chose Jordan Peterson as a thumbnail. He's always talking about cleaning your room and all this self-improvement crap. Well, let's this is okay. We're talking about culture war, so let's look at real war, because all these other simulations of war are themselves, the principles of struggle and competition are the same in all venues. It's just that in real war, if you lose, you die, and there's a lot less room for BSing because you're dead, and since you don't want to die, there's more. You're invested more in winning the struggle, right? So Well, in real war, the individualist warfare style always loses to organized warfare style. So let's look at the Bronze Age collapse in the 12th century BC. The iron-wielding sea peoples destroyed the Bronze Age chariot armies of Egypt, or not Egypt, Messenian Greece, Babylon, Hittites, and various Syrian kingdoms. We also saw a bit later, in the 3rd century BC, the Qin dynasty, again with mass formations of iron-armed soldiers, destroying the Bronze Age chariot aristocrats of the warring states in China. The mass formations of pike and shot defeated the Western mounted nobility in the 16th and 17th centuries. And finally, the Soviet mass assaults on the Eastern Front destroyed the Germans. It didn't matter. Man for man, the quote aristocratic charioteers, the mounted knights, or the German stormtrooper was better than his counterpart. He was vastly outnumbered, and arguably, and maybe not on the Eastern Front, but arguably in other cases, his counterpart was better organized, and so he lost. And this insight goes back to Livy, going back 2,000 years ago in his History of the Roman Empire. He indulges in one of the earliest known efforts of the hypothetical history, alternative history. What would have happened if Alexander the Great had invaded Italy? One of the great what ifs. Now, being a Roman patriot, he argues that Rome would have wiped the floor with Alexander. And the reasoning he gives, right, because you say, oh, he's a Roman, of course he's going to say that. But the reasoning that he gives is that he's writing, of course, after Hannibal, so this is even way, way after Alexander, that even a genius like Hannibal was not a match for a system, an organized system of the Roman Republic. And he's arguing that Alexander, by the time he would have got around to Italy, he was already, adopting a lot of the trappings of Oriental despotism. Livy mentions the idea of, prostrating before the emperor being adopted by Alexander. His cadre of elite Macedonians had been watered down by recruiting Persian soldiers. And he was just saying that Rome could suffer, Alexander couldn't suffer one defeat and win. Rome could suffer many. And he then, of course, points to Hannibal. Now, whether the Roman institutions were strong enough in the 320s BC to actually pull this off is an open question. But the principle behind Livy's sound, right? The principle is sound, that an institution, even if the individual components of the institution are less talented, less intelligent, less strong than their opponent on a man-to-man level, will still win. And so, for example, I've already mentioned this before again, but with individualism, you'll have to bootstrap it. So again, but the problem is you can't bootstrap it, right? Because there's no demand for right-wing culture, right? I mean, there's no demand for epic dramas and tragedies. Like, who's gonna buy it? Who's gonna pay for it? You're not going to make something that nobody's going to buy and no one's going to enjoy. I mean, I guess you will if you're Tolkien. You have a lot of spare time on your hands. And people did end up enjoying it, though he didn't expect anybody to. But he was already a well-established academic who could do this. Most right-wing people in our circle today are not well-established and can't do that. And so again, I compared this with the leftist bohemian poet who writes avant-garde. He gets supported, right? You might be a quote Hercules, but against the full might of the civil service run by the left, the imperial shock troops, you're helpless. And, I guess the quip, wait till they get real jobs. Oh, okay. The civil service and the academy, and they've completely pulled the rug out from underneath you. I mean, I guess that didn't work. The quote, fake jobs of the civil service and the academy are winning, right? They're exerting power over. Now, while the power is not directly economic, it has an economic effect. Because as the laws change, as people's perceptions change, as people's lifestyles and beliefs change, they changes how they consume. And if you don't want to lose your market share and you want to stay in business, you're going to have to change with them. So there was an example a couple of years ago of a job that I applied for but didn't take, where this one guy was running basically a bunch of crops that were being turned into oils for lubricants. I think it was like soybean and some other stuff. And this guy was a codgy old boomer. And he was really butthurt that the board for the corporate directors that were buying his lubricants were basically taking advice from, ESG scores. And they were like basically forcing him to change what he was doing because the corporations hired these wokesters to enforce ESG scores that forced him to change how he produced things. And it's like, this is what happens. It eventually turns into economic power. And it's because these guys don't even care. They're just so far up their own backside trying to, eke out those little profit margins that it's like, well, not only are the barbarians in the gates, I mean, the barbarians are the man behind the emperor, right? I mean, the emperor is being propped up by the barbarians. And so now the question is, well, what do you do? Well, it's kind of over for Mr. Boomer. I mean, Mr. Tradcon, it's over because he basically failed all across the board. He wastes his time, counting his coins, like the crazy hoarder, that just keeps on counting his coins every night. It's like, well, you doing anything? No, not really. And meanwhile, the enemy was organizing, building support, building cultural initiatives, and that's it. You're done. Even though they claim to be at war, it's a culture war. They not only do not fund their own side to create culture, they fund the enemy to produce culture. It's literally insane. I mean, they'll fund them to produce culture. They'll fund them, whether it's say communist Russia in the 1920s or China today, they'll fund them, because it's more profitable. And so now we have all these international crises. I mean, it's quite doubtful the Soviet Union could have ever industrialized under Lenin's rule and Stalin's rule if it hadn't been for these concessions. And so what this ultimately means is that the profit motive system fundamentally warps your way of thinking, in the sense that, so those of us who view the communists as an existential threat are going to be like, well, no, you don't very well sell to them and then give them the means to attack you, especially if they can't attack you to begin with. I mean, Russia in 1917 was a threat to nobody. It was just falling apart. Russia in 1924 had just ended the Civil War and was in tatters. I mean, it would have taken them decades to recover on their own steam. And if you saw them as the threat that they were, their desire to exterminate religion, their desire to rule the world, their desire to, from the point of view of the capitalist class, abolish capitalism, you think you just put them under interdict like North Korea and be done with it, right? But no. You see, it's a market with resources to be exploited. And if we don't exploit it, somebody else will. And there's a further pressure. If you think like that, there's the first one in principle, right? So the first one into a market, for every unit cost to grow in that market, the first one in has the lowest unit cost because there's no direct competition. Now, that's not a guarantee that he's going to stay there. He might actually be displaced. But the point is that being the first one in, he's going to have the lowest per unit cost of growth. And so they think, well, we don't want to be left in the cold. We don't want to be left out. We'll set them up. We'll be the first ones to trade with them because we can trade with them on our terms. And it's like, but then Stalin nationalizes all the factories and you've lost all your investments and you look like a fool. And then they're going to do it again with China. I mean, China has very strong capital flight controls. I feel like, if we keep poking the dragon, they're going to get to a point where it's like, you know what? We're just going to nationalize all these companies, have fun. It's happened before. It happened in Russia. It happened in Iran when they tried to nationalize BP. It happened in other countries, Egypt. So, honestly, it couldn't happen again. And again, it's an insane way of thinking. This isn't, if you're in a grapple to the death with somebody, you don't think like that because you're not going to win. You don't financially support the people that are out to kill you. But it's only in this warped understanding of crypto libertarianism that this happens. And I think a little brief history lesson is sort of in order here, because I think what makes American conservatism of the last 60 to 70 years fundamentally different than, say, conservatism in Europe and even conservatism prior to that is that they were in opposition to the New Deal consensus of FDR and Truman. And they that was the conservative angle, the sort of like Christian angle was led by William Booker Jr., who's Catholic. And the free market economic angle was led by Frank Chateaubriand, secular atheist Jew. Now, both groups felt threatened by the USSR because communism wanted to abolish capitalism and religion. And so it was a kind of alliance of convenience. And they were sort of treated as obvious bedfellows, even though it was really more of an alliance of convenience. And of course, when all the corporations went woke like 10 years ago, they pulled the rug out from underneath a lot of conservatives. They're like, well, wait a minute. We've been on the same side since the Cold War. What's going on? Well, it was an alliance of convenience. One could argue of necessity, but times have changed. And there's no fundamental alliance between these people, right? And if you go to the European conservatives, for example, you've got Justus Muser from Westphalia in the late 18th, early 19th century, who pointed out that, a lot of these social norms and traditions and lifestyles that conservatives and traditionalists want to maintain are fundamentally undercut by the market process. I remember one instance that I read from Muser. He was saying that, well, the sort of like veil that separates the domestic life from public life. So the wife and the children and the domestics are sheltered from all of these, whether they're political forces or market forces, is penetrated by the salesman, because the salesman goes from house to house to house, usually when the husband's not there because he's gone, he's at work, and can take advantage of the woman financially and possibly even sexually. So it breaks down these barriers. And again, this is a European conservative. He was aware of this. This was one of the dangers that would happen with this market force. And so expediency, so for circling all the way back to the beginning of this talk with Robert Louis Dabney, expediency here is profitability, right? You won't do what it takes because it's not profitable, right? You're not going to ultimately make the money, right? And so 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the Democrats would often smear Republican candidates as the Taliban. I think it was in Florida or maybe it was Tennessee. There was a running case where one guy was called Taliban Dan. And of course, it's a joke, right? I mean, it was rhetorical only. But if these people were anything like the Taliban, they would have already won by now because the Taliban won. And so, but the motivations were all different, right? It's a sort of, because conservatism in the United States represents the petite bourgeoisie, they're in this impossible position. Because if you look at the rise and fall of empires and civilizations, that class is always the class that loses. Either there's a revolution against the bourgeoisie, like in Russia, in which case they all get up against the wall and then it's game over. Or you have a kind of like corporate oligarchic tyranny that takes over, like say in Carthage, and they just get edged out. BlackRock hoovers up all the property. Right, the game is rigged and it's not in their favor. They think that the position they have is based on, if they just work hard enough, they'll get to be Rockefeller. If they just work hard enough, they'll just get to be Carnegie or Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. But that's not how it works. That's not how it works. Those corporations at that level get to engage in behaviors that would otherwise be illegal for you or I to do, and even for these smaller business companies to do as well. And so they're kind of stuck in this position where the very livelihood and lifestyle that they've created, that they've cultivated, puts them in this position where they are not able to act, because ultimately acting in too decisive a way would risk their financial security. And because they've eroded these sort of social connections in favor of monetary concessions, they can't rely on somebody when the money's no good, right? So, I mean, we can just go back to, let's say, classical antiquity, right? So I'm paraphrasing this, but Cleomenes of Sparta from the 3rd century BC basically said the difference between a friend and a mercenary is basically the friend wins a man over to his cause by his good character, whereas a mercenary by money. And so when the money dries up, the mercenary's out of luck. But the man with good character still has friends in a pinch. And that whole way of thinking is gone. Nobody thinks like that anymore. And in fact, going back to 2006, for me, one of the things that I thought was I've already mentioned this before in another context, but here's a little more detail. Look at all of human history from like ancient Egypt until like the War on Terror, and as far as I could tell, right up until 5 minutes ago, there were these consistent patterns of moral behavior that, hey, if you do this, you'll get by in life. Whether it's ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, Rome, the Middle Ages, the Age of Exploration, the Reformation, colonial America, it's all gone, right? Nobody cares about your character. Nobody cares about good character. They just care about, we paid you to do a job, now do what we told you to do, and if you don't like it, you can quit. So a really good example of this mindset is in the Coen Brothers' True Grit, where Matty Ross is talking to Rooster Cogburn, who's doing something that's not specifically stipulated in their deal. It's not really a contract. It's more than a gentleman's agreement, but it's less than a full contract. It's kind of a weird gray area. And she says to him in the film something to the effect that, if I'm not paying to get my way, then what am I paying you for? Right? Paying you is to get my way. And so that's sort of what's happened. Now, why do conservatives think like that? Well, because they have been under assault for so many years. They think that's a way that they can impose their cultural norms and their lifestyle, and they can preserve it because you can just pay people to pretend to go along with you, I guess. Right? That's why they're always trying to get FU money. But the problem is it doesn't work. One, because of inflation. So no matter how much FU money you think you have as Mr. Boomer conservative, you don't have enough because it's inflating away. Taxes are going up, so you're getting taxed. Okay. And also you're under threat from these sort of political and legal action groups. And so the FU money that you thought you had doesn't go nearly as far as you thought it would. And the rug is being pulled out from underneath you on multiple fronts. And, Mr. Boomer, who's like, oh, the government ain't going to own my property, is going to end up selling it to BlackRock instead of giving it to his kids, like happened throughout all of human history before. I mean, there's stories now of like farmers saying, oh, well, Johnny, you got to buy it yourself. Otherwise, I'm selling it to BlackRock, or, the equivalent thereof of BlackRock. It's insane. Like, never in the history of the world was that normal. 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, the estate went to, well, usually the firstborn, right? And then the others had to figure out what to do with it. But it didn't get sold out of the family. Not usually. You had to be really down on your luck for that to happen. And so a lot of these traditional mores and norms, of course, got in the way of profitability, got in the way of, making that little extra profit margin there. And so they got rid of it. And it's like, well, then that's not conservative. That's not traditional anymore. What exactly are you conserving? What they're conserving is their 401ks. But even then, they're not really conserving that because inflation is eating into it. And depending on how insolvent the government gets, they might just confiscate it. I mean, after all, FDR confiscated people's gold assets in the 1930s during the Great Depression. If the government did it once before, it could probably do it again. So, like to paraphrase the Bourbons, after they were restored to power, there was a saying, the Bourbons have both learned and forgotten nothing. So that's sort of where we are right now with the conservatives and why they can't win. And we'll just circle back around to 1 Timothy 6:10. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which, while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and have pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Yeah, like defeat. I mean, maybe I'll do a video sometime on what a conservative culture war, if it were being waged, would actually have looked like. That might be instructive for future activities. But that's where we're at for the end of tonight. Just real quick, next week's video is going to be about the people that did win. And that ought to be interesting. There's been some questions about my first video about the left. And it's like, well, didn't they win on the cultural issues? Well, there's more I'll have to say on that. I'll just wait till next week's episode. But this wraps up tonight's on why the conservatives can't win. And sum it up in one sentence: never let victory get in the way of profitability. Alrighty, we peaked at 59 tonight. That's, I think, a new record. That's pretty good. Okay, we've got a couple of supers. I'll read them first. Manoa, $10. Move fan move. Okay, we got 2 out of 6. So we got 4 more to go. Good. Let's see here. We got another one. Where were we here? Jose Nunez, for $9.99 US dollars. What's the countdown for the fan now? Thanks, guys. So that's 3 out of 6. We're almost there. We're almost there. Halfway there, I should say. I saw another one. Where was the other one? Polish ambassador for PLN 10. The only conservatives in America are the Amish. Well, they're getting sucked into the globalist vortex too. They're very good at keeping up their the image they've cultivated. And once upon a time, I think it was true. But I've had some dealings with the Amish, and yeah, they're definitely moving into this vortex, unfortunately. Alrighty, guys, we got a lot here in the chat. Let's check it out. Who else do we have here? New Gluff. Hi, Todd. Yeah, hello. Record Deepness. Hello. Let's see. Bing Bong Evening. Cyber Ninja Zero. Muzzies are bad because they aren't feminists. Anyone. Witticism TV. Hello. Let's see here. Jelly Crocodile. Todd, I'm very concerned about how much money I make and what to invest in. Since the currency and economy have become unstable, they want money just what it gives me, like a house. Don't we all have to focus on money in unstable and degenerating systems like ours? Well, that's kind of the thing, right? That's kind of the thing. Because ultimately, when we get to a point in a declining empire when the money's no good. And it's just done, right? Now, you could, like in more traditional village communities, within that village community, now not between villages. It was kind of like a gift economy thing where, you're all related to each other. You all are from the same tribe or village. You all have the same religion. You do these things because they need to be done. And you expect other people to do it too. And it's sort of, that's the whole point of being high trust, right? If the watchword of the right is high trust. Well, if you don't want to have, if you want to have a high trust society, then you can't have all these financial motivations just hacking it down. Because when money developed as a medium of exchange, especially coinage, which was developed in Lydia in the 6th century, in addition to being used to pay troops, which is why it was primarily invented, money is a means of dealing with strangers, right? These are people that you don't expect to see again. And how are we then going to, deal with them in a peaceful way? Well, money. It's just something if you both agree is valuable, you can then have a more peaceful interaction with a stranger. But if we're talking about neighbors, friends, and family, and all exchanges are mediated through money, you're treating them as strangers. You're treating them as, the caravan that stops in once a year. But they're not. They're your friends, your family, and your neighbors. Now, granted, we don't have high trust, and that's why this is the norm. But how did we lose the high trust? Even in right-wing subcultures in America that were not directly controlled by the left. Well, that's one of the efficient causes. Let's see here. We have another one for 10 euros by Did We Fail? Thank you for the 10 euros. Thank you for this one. Rarely get to watch them live, but always catch up these days. Wow. Thanks a lot, everybody. Very, very generous tonight. Let's see here. Let's turn that off. Let's go back up. What else we got here? Okay, Jelly Crocodile. Witticism TV. Money is openly Daily Wire's whole goal. It's cringe. Well, let's not forget when Nick Fuentes was going after Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro walked into it. He's like, well, guys, I just like making money, guys. What's wrong with that? I just like making money. I'm like, Ben, given who you are, that's like the worst thing you could have said on stage. Like, you literally just walked into it. Justin Howard. Hey, guys. Hello. Here we go. Jolly. I agree 100%. Jolly Crocodile. I've been an electrician and worked in other lesser-known trades. The work is long and brutal, and they don't even pay that much these days. Trades are a scam. Boomers don't pay well. Boom. Exactly. Now, my brother's also been in the trades, and maybe not as long as you, Jolly, but he can definitely confirm your narrative. We have another one today. Zach, $5 US. Thank you. I listen to these while I work. Continue the great work. You have become one of my favorite channels to watch. Well, thank you, Zach. I'm glad you enjoy it. All right, let's see here. Jolly Crocodile, where were we here? M. Trades are also less prestigious than establishment censures, which are manifold in our system. If you got rid of a lot of these nonsense jobs, work in the trades would become more desirable. Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, they might be more prestigious on paper, but just paper. Jolly Crocodile, 100K isn't even a good salary anymore. Government takes 28% or more, and the cost of living is just going higher. Yep. Yeah, it's true. It's getting rough out there, guys. So as to here's an example to learn from, right? Now, they have had 500 years of experience doing this. I don't expect to be able to snap my fingers and get this tomorrow. But in Canada, on the Western the Western provinces, many Hutterites settled there, fleeing from Eastern Europe persecution, Central and Eastern Europe's from persecution. And one of the complaints that a lot of Canadian farmers have is because they don't have employees technically, right? They're all part of these colonies and communes where they practice a kind of, well, for lack of a better word, socialism. They don't have to pay healthcare for their workers, right? It's not a government mandate. Okay, this is your healthcare portion you got to assign for your workers. They've already got a wholly organized society that sort of works around that. Then you've got the taxes on the worker, so all these financial costs are gone, and it gives them a competitive advantage against their private their sort of private competition, non-Hutterite, Anglo-Canadian counterparts. And they don't like that. But you see, how does it work? Because it falls outside of the regulatory model of Canada, right? Canada doesn't really know what to do with these people. They kind of do work and produce things, but it's not in a way that they can easily monetize and tax. So the government is left scratching its head. Because again, it's a high trust society where you basically just do stuff for the good of the group. Which again, rhetorically, this is what the dissident right has been saying for the last 10 years. Which, again, I've already talked about the simulation in history and simulation, all these other things. So maybe they just don't know better. But that's the end goal, right? That's the end goal. When you have your tribe, your people, your group, that's how you do economics. You don't charge your brother, your neighbor, your cousins money to do something. You do it as an extension of filial kinship, religious obligations. That's very doable. It used to be the norm throughout history. You'd have money to deal with strangers, which again, I'm not in principle opposed to that. It's one way to reduce conflict between groups. But when you treat everybody as a stranger, you're alone, and life gets hard, and it really sucks. King Salmon Fish. Dude, you're vibing on the same relevant crap as me, and I haven't talked to you in a minute. Solid job. I'll be around later. Well, thank you, King Salmon Fish. Let's see. Enoch Powell was the last lettered man of the right. Unless I'm forgetting someone, which I probably am. Yeah, no, you're right. Enoch Powell also wrote poetry. So, yeah, that's true. Let's see. Who are we now? Nudge Unit. Base takes here today. Well, hello, Nudge Unit. Witticism TV. Trump's place gets raided by the FBI, and Steven Crowder announces "fight" is the promo code on his website for his merch. It's just a grift and no real action. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no, yeah. I'm gonna bring this up on the screen here for everybody, and I will be streaming with Witticism TV tomorrow night. So yeah, everybody should tune in for that too. Read "Stop Giving Money to People That Hate You" by Brian Namier. Well, there you go. I know. It's like, give me a break. Big brain content. Soldier always beats warriors. Yep. Always, always, always. John Goras. Jordan Peterson is like, clean your room and stay in it forever since your community is destroyed. Yeah. Rashi Strider, clean your room, neighborhood's on fire. Well, that too. Minoan, the Roman war machine. Sneed oil denied. I'm hoping a deep recession will get rid of these non-productive jobs. Yeah, the Romans beat everybody, including the merchants in Carthage. So, another L for the merchants. Sneed oil denied. Yes, none of that. Man, you see, part of the reason Minoan we have all these non-productive jobs is America is such a litigious society, right? A lot of these people are hired to do paperwork and meaninglessness in order to meet so the government has certain mandates for this is what you must do if you don't want to be liable for any sort of lawsuit. And you don't know if that lawsuit's going to go through or not. You just have to hope it doesn't. But most people don't live on hope. They have to actually take proactive measures to do so. And that ends up with a lot of this stuff. It's basically a product of a litigious society. Polish ambassador, all that presupposes that a culture war is winnable in the first place. I think it could have been. I think it's too late now. Just, the ship's sinking, everybody. Time to get off. Yeah, Cyber Ninja Zero, the Stalin quote, the capitalists will sell us the rope to hang them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He had it. Polish ambassador. We just call it war because it sounds fun, but in reality, we live in a democracy and compromise. Equal, righteous, always lose righteousness is the name of the game system. Big brain content. Oh, I don't know who that is. Okay. Bullfrog VA. Hey. Hello, Bullfrog. Record deepness. I watched a Sutton interview just today for his book, National Suicide. Horrible how the manufacturers kept on popping up the Soviet military machine well into the Cold War. Well, yeah. So in the middle of the Vietnam War, 1971-72, Russia has this big famine going on. And what does Nixon do? Well, Nixon works with international, financial institutions, so these NGOs, to give the Soviet Union cheap loans to buy U.S. and Canadian grain. And that was called the Great Grain Heist. Of course, the Soviet Union was then supplying weapons to North Vietnam. Sus. Real sus. Also, U.S. corporations sold to the Soviet Union state-of-the-art ball bearings necessary for guidance systems for the MIRV nuclear missile platforms. Madness. Back in the Clinton years, missile technology was sold to China. I mean, this is literally the most insane thing. I mean, it's a game that's eventually going to run out. So I'll give you an example. Great Britain, from England, going back to the Spanish Armada, all the way up until World War II, had played this game of keeping Europe divided. Well, they eventually lost that game. Europe's no longer divided. But Europe's got other problems as of 2022. In the game of, funding enemies that can later attack you, America has won most of those games so far, but eventually that game is going to run out, just like England's game of keeping Europe divided. And I think with China, we're getting pretty close. I'll have more to say on China at some point in the future, but I think that China is a fundamentally different threat than the Soviet Union, than Germany and Japan in World War II, or even Germany in World War I. And I think that we might be nearing the end of this game from the American point of view. Euthanasia. Hello. Let's see. Polish ambassador. It's always easier to dismantle than to build. So on the sinking ship, they will win. And we most certainly are a sinking ship, not because virtues, but because system which demanded compromise. Volpes persona. I'm late. Any fans? Not yet. We're 50% of the way there, guys. Just 3 more supers and we get there. Not too demoralized, but to point toward the elephant on a sinking boat. No. 3. We need 3 more, Minoan. Let's see. I'm not appreciating the double entendres here, guys. Let's see here. JLM. Hello. Wow, a lot of people coming in. Minoan, there's a familiar handle, I believe. I've seen you over at Ollie's Joint. Okay, just small talk. Let's see. Zach, is there a link to donate on Entropy? I don't have an Entropy account. I'll look into that. But if you want to donate, Zach, you can go to Buy Me a Coffee, which is in the description box of this video. You can also go to Locals to support me there directly. But yeah, I'll look into Entropy. Thanks for that. Let's see here. Record deepness. Primogenitor greater than speculation. Yes. Wait. Wait, 6? I thought he told us 5. Fact check this. Okay, guys. I'll look at the Moldbug episode later today and give you an update on the community tab. Okay, big brain context. 6 supers for the fan. I meant to say, well, at least I think I said, 6 super chats asking me specifically to do the fan. Again, I'll look up my Moldbug stream and put a notification on the community tomorrow. Wisconsin Kraut. Love the show name. I had to miss most of it before watching since I was 16. Okay, well, I'm glad you like it. Tell us more about the modern Amish, Todd. Well, I mean, this could be a whole episode in itself, so I can't really say a whole lot. But I mean, basically, the demands of being competitive in business, specifically with regards to technology, are eroding the Amish's unique cultural identity of resisting technological change. That's basically the broadest way I can put it. So, again, this could be a future episode, so I'll keep a note of that. Let's see here. Record deepness. Were the early work Forrestal, Welch, McCarthy, Schwartzby examples of true rightward movement, or were they trapped in the linguistic cage of the Cold War? I think Forrestal was great. He, quote unquote, fell out of a window, more like pushed by some communist spy. More likely what happened. I mean, he was killed, so he was really close to the truth. I think Forrestal had to be killed because he was really close to some of the truths. Like Patton was killed. McCarthy, ultimately, I haven't really studied the whole McCarthy controversy. I mean, I know that there was a communist infiltration. I know that McCarthy pushed against it. I think these men that you mentioned were better, but ultimately, the real issues we're talking about are transferring intergenerational wealth to the next generation, preserving it for the next generation, and then also supporting and funding right-wing cultural content creators. Like initiatives put right-wing people in university positions, academy, right? To my knowledge, they didn't do that. JLM, oh, coffee, roll that beautiful bean footage. One more. Let's see. Where were we here? Volpes persona, civilization runs on goodwill. Goodwill cannot be bought, only served. Minoan, how does the West's takedown of the South Africa fit in tonight's stream? Taking out of competitor of leftist moralizing. Well, throughout the Cold War, the United States was cold to South Africa. The active fighting was done by communist insurgents in places like Namibia, modern-day Namibia, former German Southwest Africa, and also in Angola and Mozambique, which were destabilizing the South African regime. On the one hand, it did not serve U.S. interests for the communists to control the Cape of Good Hope, but on the other hand, they were not wholly supportive of the regime in South Africa at the same time. Let's see. Let's see. Did we fail? €1. Thank you. 100,000 a year is a decent pay for someone who's been a wagey for years. Zach, I'm going to go to work oil fields because I'm almost out of my 20s and I can't work low scale, lower paying jobs forever. Lopez persona, Minoan promised me fan service tonight to sign your soldiers, Todd. Tricky Woo, get in shape, Zach. I go to the okay, Zach, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. All right. I'm starting to measure the height of those books behind Todd. Okay, Bing Bong. Enoch Powell was reading Greek at age 5. He was a formidable intellect. He was so popular among the British public that Ted Heath threw him out of the Conservative Party, fearing his own position. All right. Oh, guys, we're pretty much at the hour mark. All right, guys. Here's the deal. Tomorrow night, when I interview Witticism TV, you will see the fan move. So everybody else, tune in tomorrow. It's Todd Lewis of the Praise of Flight podcast, signing off.